Alright, so this weekend, I guess it wasn't really the weekend, it was Thursday. I saw The Fate of the Furious, otherwise known as F8, or I guess as I said, there's not really any other titles for it. But I've I've been a fan of the series. I wouldn't have gone and seen the eighth movie out of the blue. That would be kind of stupid. But so I was pretty psyched for this movie. The the past couple movies have gotten pretty insane. They're not really feasible, obviously, if you've seen any of them or even the trailers, because there's like cars dropping out of airplanes or outrunning submarines. I mean, it's not real. Do you understand that movies aren't real? But they're enjoyable to watch, I think, and they're good action movies. They're entertaining. There's not a lot of thought when you're watching it, but at least it's not Transformers. I'll say that, because those are a pleasure to watch. But so there were a couple reveals in the movie that were kind of odd. I thought it was kind of odd that Dom had a kid. Like, that was a little weird. Especially since I don't think we've seen that character since the fifth movie. Maybe like a cameo in the sixth, but she hasn't shown up. I also thought it was kind of odd how they decided to tie the last two or three movies together with some villain that they've all not encountered but messed with, kind of, by proxy, and we'd never heard of her. It just seemed a little weird. But you kind of have to come up with weird things when you're on 8 movies, and you still have to make stuff up. Aside from the story, though, the action scenes were solid. Of course, the opening race was really silly. You know, jumping out of a car on fire, winning a race in reverse. And then the highlight was easily what they gave away in some of the more recent trailers, where in about the middle of the movie, Cypher takes not all, well, maybe all the cars in New York City that can drive themselves and just turns them into our own army. And that seems ridiculous. It should have been longer, but it was very well done and it was very entertaining, and it was just creative, like how they dropped out of an airplane. It's an example of how they're upping the ante in each movie, I guess. But it was a really fun scene, and it was just, I would like to see more stuff like that. Not just in a Fast and Furious movie, but movies in general. Just be creative with what you're doing, and it makes the movie a lot more engaging and memorable when you have those action scenes like that. They just really stand out. And then towards the end of the movie, I mean, the submarine had to be the climax from the trailers. That was kind of obvious. It would be really weird if they opened with that or something. But that scene was, again, very well done. Similar to how in the sixth one they took down the airplane. It was it was really long, but it was just another creative scene that I can't even think of any action movies I've seen in general that have submarines in them. It's kind of a rarity, I guess. But it was an interesting location with interesting, can't say vehicles, um, equipment, whatever. And putting it all together was good. Then, probably about halfway through the movie, after everyone gets together, like without Dom, there was a little shout out that I thought was funny, where they're like, "Oh, why don't we call Brian?" And then I think Michelle Rodriguez was like, "They're not a part of this anymore," and like that was the entirety of Brian being mentioned or anything. Like it felt kind of forced. It was like you don't really even need to mention his character because everybody in real life knows what happened. I mean, it just felt really weird to have them say that. And also kind of weird because his brothers have hinted, I guess, at the possibility that his character could come back with one or both of them playing him. So it seems a little odd that they kind of put that in there. I mean, maybe they're ruling it out, which is fine. I don't think that's necessarily the greatest idea to. I mean, at best, they would have to be like, this is his brother. They can't bring back the character completely. But it does seem a little weird that they would do that. One thing that it seemed like they didn't do as much of in this movie as they have in the past was like fist fights or hand to hand. I mean, there was this prison breakout, but now that I think about it, I guess well, no, there were a few scenes in Seven. I mean, there was the whole bus when Brian was on the bus. Michelle Rodriguez fighting the security guards at that dude's birthday party. And then there was also towards the end when Brian had to get to the tower. I mean, like, that was 3 scenes alone in Seven. But it seemed like the prison breakout scene was the only one in 8 that was actually, like, hand-to-hand combat. Or at least, like, a big one. And I guess I'm not usually a huge fan of those, but it just seems like that's been a staple in the series. And so it seemed a little weird when there wasn't as many of them. Granted, the prison breakout scene was really good. I would like to see more stuff like that in general. Just the way that it was filmed and the fact that there were a couple different levels to it. It was, I think, like 3 stories maybe, and how they chased each other around. It was a good scene. And then I guess you could say on the end when Jason Statham was on the plane, but that was more a gunfight. There wasn't hardly any hand to hand there. But that again was a really fun scene too. I guess what I'm saying is that the movie was made up of really good scenes, because that's how I've talked about everything so far. But overall, the movie felt a little lackluster compared to Seven. I'm not sure if it was because Paul Walker wasn't in it, or if it just so happened to be that it was like the script, the directing, and just, I don't know, everything else. I mean, well, probably not the script, because that was just as weak as the rest of them. These aren't great movies when it comes to writing, but that's not really the point either. But overall, I would say that it's one of the better Fast and Furious movies. I would say probably below 5, 6, and 7, not necessarily in that order, but under those, but better than 1, 2, 3, and 4. So that's a rough idea of where it places, I guess. Overall, I would probably say that it's 7 out of 10. Certainly something that I'll see again in theaters, no doubt about that. And I would recommend it to people if they're fans of action movies, because there's really still not a whole lot of continuity in these movies. Maybe not continuity is the word I'm looking for, but like, you don't need to see one to understand the next one. There's just not a whole lot that carries over from one to the other. And so, like, even Letty dying didn't have a huge impact. Like, once she came back, it was just kind of like, oh, and here she is. And so, like, they would make a reference to it. But, like, I went to 7 with somebody who hadn't seen any of the other ones, and they didn't come out being like, oh, why did she do that? Or why did they do that way? Or something. Like, it didn't. The events of the previous movies don't carry over in any real meaningful way. Even with Jason Statham in this one, like, in the trailers, you knew that he was the bad guy in 7, so to say that they're working together wasn't like a stretch of the imagination or anything.